Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with ChangeMakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So, welcome, Hetty. It's good to see you here. We finally get to have this conversation. It was delayed because you'd been unwell earlier in the year. And, our paths have kind of crossed, swinging around through the Coaching Ethics Forum and the different things that have been happening. And I just think that you have a really interesting story that perhaps many of us, including me, don't know much of. And so I'd love for you to share with us and me sort of where you've come from to then land and be inspired to be in this coaching space. And you can start wherever you want to start.
What an open-ended, generous invitation, Wendy-Ann. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to come and have this conversation. I always enjoy these conversations immensely because we get to have the kind of conversation. I'm currently actually writing about it right now. To coin Margaret Wheatley's phrase, islands of sanity, where everything can slow down and we can actually have richer conversations that meander, that go deeper, that go further. So that's exactly the kind of invitation you've just given me. So thank you. Good to be here today. I'm going to start with the way I was brought up growing up, because I think that for all of us it's significant, obviously. And in my case, the circumstances of my upbringing, I think, have lent themselves very particularly to my choices of coaching, perhaps for all of us. So I was brought up by a single mother who was a refugee from the Second World War, from Nazi Germany. She was Jewish, and she came to this country, went to art school. She had already attended art school in Berlin, where she came from. And she became a talented illustrator, painter, and started to make a career, and then started having children, as I say. And she was the two interesting things. One is that some Jews, she lost all of her family except her mother, who came over and who was quite deeply traumatized by what had happened. Who came over to Britain, and then my mother, they had a difficult relationship. But the significance of this, I think, is that a lot of some refugees choose to put everything behind them and forget about it, and other people dwell on the past. And my mother was one who decided to put everything behind her, but what she retained, or perhaps because of she went on to teach in art schools, and that was her world. And she became quite a renowned teacher of drawing and illustration at one of the top art schools in London. I was brought up in London, England. And she became quite politicized. So as a refugee, she had that experience of receiving tremendous care and kindness from people. And goodness knows, thank goodness she chose to come to England. She was given the choice. She could have gone to Holland, where they had relatives, and she would have ended up in the camps and almost certainly dead had she done that. That whole branch of the family did not survive. But she chose England. She thought it'd be more fun. That was her rationale. She was 16. I mean, that's what you want at 16. But gradually she became more and more politicized. And she talked about the thing that what we need as human beings is, we do need kindness and care and love, of course, but we want justice and we want equity. And I think from a very early age, I was brought up with a sense of what ethics means in a lived way. And so she joined lots of organizations. She was one of those who went on marches, CND marches, which is the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which was big when I was just virtually not born yet. and, marches against nuclear arms. She went on marches all her life for justice, for peace, and for equity, really, for equality. And I remember when I eventually got married and had children and bring them up, she said, "Oh, I'm going for you and the kids because you can't go, you're too busy, but I'll go on this much because it's important." And she would have been out there arguing for justice and for all peoples. And she was very clear that surviving the Holocaust did not make her special in any way, that justice was for all people. She cared equally for all people who were victims of prejudice and cruelty and war. I remember this during the Rwanda War, for example. She said, the Holocausts continue, the genocides continue. And I think that brings us really up to the present day. But I'm not going to comment on that because that's not what we're here for. And the fulcrum, the center of where I learned about what ethics can be in a lived way was around the kitchen table. So we had a big through room, sitting room at one end, kitchen in the middle, and then we had a sort of what would have been in the old Victorian, Victorian London would have been the lean-to, which would have been a kitchen-y bit. She turned that into a little dining room. So we had this sort of conservatory dining room. And I remember all those conversations that would range right across from local gossip, what was happening at school, tell me about what you're reading, or, any questions or things to discuss, right through to politics, to, that was all mixed, or, trivia, like, guess what, Mum, I've seen this lovely top that I want to buy, and da da da. So there was never any false barriers. And that would be while we prepared food, while we ate food around the kitchen table, and while we all cleared up together. So it was a great warm place. It was what I've called later on a crucible, where anything got chucked in, and out of it formed our capacity to think independently, to argue without acrimony and without nastiness, to really argue our case, to challenge, to share. Lots of laughter. Humor, very important, very, very important. I'm convinced, actually, I married my husband because even after 35 years of marriage, or longer now, we still make each other laugh. And I think that's one of the secrets of a good life. And a sense of care. And care isn't about being mushy or sentimental or, going, ooh, isn't that sad? It's a much more robust concept. So I guess that's what brought me eventually through studying modern languages at university. I was at Cambridge and I did French and Italian, and was very disappointed actually to find that I didn't have the same richness of conversations. A lot of interesting people would come to our house, and she knew a lot of interesting people, and the same culture would continue. So I got to listen into those conversations. And sadly, at Cambridge, fewer of those. It seems like everybody was busy trying to make their mark or find a partner. Too much testosterone and hormones flying around at that age. And then I studied history of art. I did a master's in history of art after that at the Courtauld Institute. That was another couple of years. And I was lucky again to have a fantastic cohort. And again, there was that blend of art, history, sociology, politics, present day, having fun. We never stopped having fun. But we brought all of that in together and saw where the links were. And then after that, I trained as a psychotherapist. And I practiced as a psychotherapist for some time as a transpersonal psychotherapist. I trained in psychosynthesis, which brings the spiritual element in, our dreams and hopes and aspirations. And again, that touches very, very clearly on this ethical dimension. We don't just live for ourselves alone. And I then went into policy work. And so for about 8 years, I set up and was the founding director, and then I moved sideways as became the research and development director of the Parenting, Education and Support Forum, short form, we called it the Parenting Forum, where I engaged a lot with both at national and local politics, around moving the discourse away in the UK and I think around the world. The thing around parents was very much good parents and bad parents. And good parents would be seen as heroic and wonderful and, to be praised and loved. And bad parents were to be chastised and demonized. And they were the subject of the tabloid press. And then the social services would weigh in. And our whole remit was to shift that discourse to, broadly speaking, in a nutshell, it takes a village to raise a child. And that
What was the impetus for going in that direction with like to form that new entity that you were working in?
Well, yeah, good question. I was slightly by accident. I was R&D director of a charity, a donating, a funding charity, and we always got involved in whatever we funded. And at the time, it was the United Nations. They have these international years of, and at the time, it was the International Year of the Child. And we, as a funding charity, had put a lot, our remit was to spread the principles of counselling, if you like, in the sense of listening with attention, asking good questions, and supporting, broadly spreading the principles and the techniques into areas where you didn't call it counselling, but away from the pathologizing and potentially stigmatizing idea of, you go to a counsellor because you've got a problem, and to bring it into a lot of other areas. And the director of the charity, Richard Evans, at the time, offered to put money into the International Year of the Child, put funding for British initiatives on the understanding that we'd put an emphasis on parenting, education, and support, that we would move forward this idea that it takes a village, it takes a society to raise a child. And I, at the time, was doing research into that area, and I wrote a paper based on some United States research that was based on home visiting. And they did a longitudinal study which showed that for every dollar spent on home visiting when the babies and the children are young by trained home visitors, you saved $7 later on in, children held back, if you like, or don't go down the route of delinquency and educational failure or into crime, but who actually have higher educational achievement. So that they'd done these complicated math things. And I used that as the basis of to extrapolate from and say, so if we broaden this out, and if we were to provide similar training and workshops for ordinary parents to acquire the sort of skills that we today know as basic coaching skills. Yeah. How to listen with care and attention, how to advocate for, how to ask good questions, how to be present, and so on. And that's what we were doing. And so I wrote this paper. It went all the way into government, and suddenly they were saying, right, we need to create a body. And they asked if I would be the first director. So I did that for about 8 to 10 years, nearly 10 years. And it took me into the world of policymaking, which was fascinating and exciting. And I was able to input into, it was a Labour government at the time. Jack Straw was Home Secretary, and his remit was to reduce crime. So there was a nice synchronicity there. So we got funding from government and from other bodies, from Carnegie and so on. And that was a very exciting time to feel that you were actually helping to shift the public discourse around this. So Sure Start started. I had many colleagues who were involved. This was very much a whole sector movement. And under the Labour government, some good things were done at that time, which sadly were not seen to be essential by subsequent governments and were mostly undone. And we are yet again in a rather difficult state in the UK with totally underfunded early years care.
Mm.
And we know that, with all the attention that's now going on around trauma, don't we, that the
Mm.
early years are critical. So that's how I got into that. And eventually, I really missed working with people. And so that's when I went back into coaching. Yeah.
There we go.
So all of that contributes, if you like, to my take on ethics,
Yeah.
and my take on coaching.
Yeah. And you do more than just coach right now, though. For
Yeah.
a while you've been doing other things that
Hmm.
even not you didn't just jump into coaching, or you did things along the way. So what were some of those things that were driving you along the way?
So I've always loved writing.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say I see myself as a writer, but that sounds a bit grandiose. But it is true that we kind of pick our identities, don't we? And we try to live into them and up to them, if you like. And so maybe by calling myself a writer, it kind of I hold my own feet to the fire. I hold my own self accountable to finding the space to write. I find it very satisfying. And
Well, here's something I've been thinking
yeah.
about recently with writing.
Mm,
Is that because I've found writing pen to paper really difficult, but I've
mm.
longed for it my whole life. I remember sitting at my grandparents' house with a pad and pen, and they would have these pens on the fridge, and they would bring them down, sit them on the dining room table, and I would sit there with the pen or pencil in my hand and the paper, and I go, I want to do something with this, but I don't know what or where to start. It was a strange feeling when I reflect back on it. And just recently, I've gone, but I am a writer, but I just do it in a different form. It doesn't have to be the direct pen to paper. It doesn't have to be the direct fingers to the keyboard. I can speak my authorship and capture it through my voice, because that's when I'm thinking most creatively, is when I can
Uh-huh.
vocalize everything rather than trying to capture my brain that can work very fast and go off on tangents. I can't capture that on the keyboard. It's too fast. So I need a different space to capture it. And AI allows me to capture that. So I'm authoring in a different way. And I questioned the authenticity of that. And
Ah, it sounds brilliant.
I said I even asked ChatGPT about this. I said, what is it about this kind of authorship? Because it works for me. And finally, stuff that's zooming around my head is coming out. And it's reported back to me, and you can maybe comment on this if you want, but it said, the pen to paper is only a relatively recent kind of thing. Some of the authors of way back have always had someone else either capturing their words and putting that down for them, or they've just been orators, and then other people have written it up later and then published it. They said the authorship has arrived in many different forms, and I just have the verbal kind, and we've trying to always put it on pen to paper, and that direct insertion doesn't necessarily work for everyone, and not me necessarily. But in editing, I
So
can go
true.
back in and edit. I can
Yeah.
do pen to paper. I can edit. I can be really good at editing, but that first
Mm.
phase has to come through the head
Voice,
voice.
oral. I mean, it's so true and so right, Somebody luckily input into ChatGPT the correct information. But, every culture has an oral tradition.
Yeah.
And you're completely right, and that's why, and tales that went down from generation to generation from, the original storyteller, master storyteller, and then they'd be heard around the campfire or the equivalent, and and then someone else would say, "Oh, wonderful story, but if we added a little bit here, changed a little bit there," and then it would carry on. And who knows what the original was? And that's wonderful. It's a rich, and then it becomes a whole shared endeavor. And storytellers were much prized in most early cultures. They would go often from village to village or town to town or even country to country, bringing the news, bringing the tales. And as you so rightly comment, putting pen to paper and writing down is not by any means the only way, and it doesn't suit everybody. I recognize that thing of one's brain working faster. I often find that I'm quite enjoy and quite sort of fluent when I'm talking, even going off on tangents and then bringing it back to the original point. Whereas when I'm writing, I sometimes lose that. So, like you, I found other little sneaky tricks and tools. I use the notes function on my phone, and I sometimes find myself waking up in the early morning with ideas or thoughts or feelings I wanted to get done. And it's not like writing, you're just writing a few notes, but it gives you the basis then to build something. Um, so yeah, I mean, writing has always been important for me, and not just one-to-one coaching, but I do groups. I've always facilitated groups, designed programs, and in more recent years, I used to work a lot more in corporates, and we would do big, leadership development programs or coaching skills programs or whatever. And I do that a lot less now. I've done my time, as it were. It was great, but my interest now, I think that's good. We move on and we make space for other people. And the two areas in terms of group work, in terms of programs where I'm still active. One is in the transpersonal. So we've just relaunched I have a colleague, Christopher Connolly, Spirit at Work. So that's the transpersonal leadership coaching program. It's both for leaders and coaches who want to lead more ethically, who want to coach with a sense of the broader picture in mind. And that's broader, that includes both the complexity of the world we live in, where you can't silo any longer politics from social theory or social justice from this, from that any longer. They're very much enmeshed and entangled. And importantly, we bring what we call the spiritual dimension in, which I would say is very much around ethics. It's not about religion. It's not about, what we call higher sidelining. Everyone needs to go off and hide on a mountain and meditate. It is about what I've written about called secular spirituality. How do we bring a sense of living with a sense of meaning and purpose and making our contribution to what Aristotle called the good life, whatever we conceive that to be in an everyday level. And for that, something needs to spark our spirit. It's not a transactional thing. No one's going to say, okay, you do this many good things today and I'll pay you X. It doesn't work like that. It's about trying to live as rich and meaningful a life as possible during our time here. So Spirit at Work. And then the other area I do a lot of work in is with women leaders. I still think there's an important space
Yeah, I
for
agree.
women to think about what kind of leadership do they want, because they look around and goodness knows we've got some very particular role models right now. And I would say this might just be the last thrashings of the dinosaurs. I'm not a big believer in the strongman model, but that's what we're seeing big time right now.
Yeah, it is. And you have a close association to the Association for Coaching
I do.
Work.
Yes.
And they've got a magazine that you're also heading up as well, and it's called Coaching Perspectives.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, I founded the magazine. That was now, we've just recently, I think last year, had our 10-year anniversary. Can you believe it? It's gone in a flash. So I've known the Association for Coaching since its earliest days. And interestingly, here's a link. The three founders of the Association for Coaching, Catherine Tulper, Alex Sabo, and Darren Robson, came on one of the early transpersonal coaching programs that I ran that John Whitmore and I ran together. So we designed it together way back when in the early 2000s to bring it out of the world of psychotherapy and bring it into the world of coaching, where we can be much more creative, make it accessible to quote unquote ordinary people or quote unquote normal neurotics, as we all are. And there's a lot of good stuff. And it was taken up with much appetite. And they came on that program. And I believe, and I having spoken to them over the years, that the kinds of approaches and, if you like, ethical foundation that we were teaching in that program got picked up very much in the mission of the AC, the Association for Coaching. And it's one of the reasons I've always held a candle for them. They're not so much about, ticking the boxes, and much more about how are you going to tell your story? To what degree are you able to reflect on what you do, why you do it, and what the impact is, and to incorporate research, hard data, but to also encourage people to step up and be their best selves, both as professionals and as citizens in society. And so when a call went out to say, any volunteers out there want to do stuff, I'd long been thinking, I think we need a really good, accessible magazine. We've got some good academic journals out there, but we want something that's really accessible and fun to read. And so, yeah, I guess it must be 2014. We founded the magazine. I was the first editor. I had a fantastic, just two people who joined the team. Sue Stockdale as deputy editor, and Sally Phillips as the most ferocious and excellent sub-editor, because I said there are several principles. One is we will always try and be as diverse and equal as possible. So really getting in diverse voices and having to do that in a promotional way, not just wait for them to come to us, but to go out there and seek diversity. Second, that issues around diversity and also the climate and our world, the wellness of our world, would always stay front of mind. And last but not least, absolute quality. That the best writing we can get, and there should be, touch wood, as few typos and clunky phrases as possible. And that's been maintained. And I'm now executive editor with two fantastic editors running it, James Bridgman and Claire Manning. And it's gone from strength to strength. And I'm delighted and proud to say that it's now read all over the world. It goes to 12,000 members. And yeah, something I have to say I'm very proud of, because I think we've tackled often challenging issues. During, for example, the Black Lives Matter period, because we only publish 4 times a year, we couldn't possibly do more. But we stopped everything and we went out there and we asked a number of coaches of color from different ethnic backgrounds to comment on what they were seeing and to have a platform for their voices. So I'm proud of many things that we've done in it and continue, and very proud of the team that we've got. It's fantastic. So yeah, that thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. And as my role also extends, I'm director of publication strategy, because we also publish the academic journal, the AC. We're a major sponsor of that, and we're the primary sponsor of the philosophy of coaching. And I love the way each of these publications has a slightly different perspective, and we now collaborate much more together. So that something could be very research-based in the journal, the academic journal, peer-reviewed, and then we would do a much more popular, accessible article and then cross-refer, or long-form thinking about ethical issues, for example, might find their way into the philosophy of coaching. And also, last but not least, I'm a founder member of what used to be called the JGSG, the Joint Global Statement Group, a completely unmemorable and terrible name, but nobody could think of a better one at the time. And it was bringing together representatives from all the major coaching associations and bodies to bring out a public statement around the coaching profession's acknowledgement of the climate and biodiversity crisis in the world, and to encourage awareness and a range of different ways of supporting coaches to perhaps address these issues, or to address these issues in their work in a natural and easy way, not to force anybody to bring the topic in. But if, given we're all goldfish swimming in the same goldfish bowl and the water is becoming quite toxic, we need to, help our clients work with that. And that's now just been relaunched as the Sustainability Coaching Council with an expanded statement that recognizes the interdependence, enmeshment, if you like, of climate, ecological issues, biodiversity issues with social justice, with spiritual and ethical issues as well. So it's quite an exciting, we're just on the cusp, if you like, of a new phase as the SCC, Sustainability Coaching Council, gets launched. And I'm part of that body as well.
Mm-hmm. I've kind of deliberately kept away from that with the Coaching Ethics Forum.
You have enough on your plate.
Well, it's out of principle, really. It's really
Yeah.
to not take a stand on any
Sure.
of those issues, but keep the forum really just to an absolute open dialogue and not actually take a position. And I think that's the right space for the forum to be in.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, so to some people's angst, perhaps, I deliberately keep away from anything that takes a particular position. So rather than take a position, come in and let's have a chat about it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but it stayed in my mind. You mentioned that you had done some work with John Whitmore.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have a story, a memorable story, or something that really stands out to you that you would love to share with us of your experience of working with him?
Oh, I worked with him for a long time. I knew the Whitmores very well because I trained at the Psychosynthesis Trust with his then wife, Diana Whitmore. And we all became good friends. And for a while, Diana was godmother to my eldest daughter. So, we were close.
Close, yeah.
And then I ended up working with John at Performance Consultant. So we worked together for some years. He was a wonderful person to work with. He was enormously generous and kind in a non-fussy way. He would just really always stand back and let other people come forward and this sort of thing. He was disruptive, memorably, excuse me. He walked onto a platform once it was a conference to do with finance services, for financial services. So it was full of bankers and people like that and traders and other financial people. And he walked on and he said, let's face it, he said, banking is really gambling. He said, you're all gamblers, gambling with other people's money. There was a sort of quickened, before people dared say things like that. John was bold, he was courageous, and he loved being disruptive. He had a mischievous sense of humor. And yeah, it was always interesting, it was always fun, he was very creative. I loved doing the transpersonal with him. And I'll leave you with one funny little story. He I wasn't actually present, but this is a story that I heard about John. There were two other partners that came into performance consultants at the time, as it was then, David Whitaker and David Hemery. David Hemery was the Olympic hurdler, and David Whitaker had been an Olympic hockey player. And I think at a sort of picnic event, they played a game of football together. And John refused to give up the ball. He would dribble it until he could score. And when this was pointed out to him and said, football is a team game. Oh, no, I just want to score. And that was a little bit John. He loved the idea of teams, but he was a bit of a maverick. He was a racing driver when he was a young man and got up to all sorts of hijinks, which I won't go into. Stories were told at his funeral, which were, very entertaining by ex-racing drivers and things. And he was brought up by parents. His mother ran the Red Cross in his area of Kent. So, he was brought up that we are on this planet, very similar to me in the sense that, we were brought up that you're not just on this planet to have fun. You're here to make a contribution, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be good works in that sense. It could be anything. My mother was a painter and an artist and a wonderful teacher. We all do our bit, don't we? And So that's how he was brought up as well. So yeah, that was John Whitmore really, and he's been sorely missed. He was a mentor to many important people.
Yeah.
So his influence, I think, lived on in the Association for Coaching because I know he was a mentor to Darren Robson. Darren and I used to talk about his influence a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sorely missed.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we all have some imprint that we make, whether it's intentional or not, but it happens. So thinking about your vast experience, what do you think you would like us to know about something that you've done that where it's left an imprint? And it might not be something that we necessarily know. Some of the people I speak to have very well-known imprints in a huge way in their particular field. So I like to dig into maybe what we don't know, something that you've done or
I can't think. I mean, a few things spring to mind. One is I'm proud and delighted at having brought up a family.
yeah.
I have two wonderful daughters. I have a stepson I didn't bring up, but delighted to have him in our family. He and his wife now live not far away. And, it's people sort of treat bringing up a family like falling off a log. It's probably the toughest job that we do. It's the smallest democracy in the world. Can we, how do we bring children up in a world that's trying to grab their attention all the time with social media and the devices and the amount of noise and stuff there is in the world, to give them space to develop their own thinking, the muscles. And I'm proud to say I feel I've done that. I think our daughters are very fine human beings indeed, and they both contribute in their own ways, in their own lives. So that perhaps people don't know about so much of me, but they would know that I am very I've always been very adamant about keeping work and family on equal footing. That work is never more important than family, and if I have to choose, I will put family first. Um, I'm pleased with my book, The Future of Coaching. Not so much, I mean, it's always an achievement, isn't it? Writing a book, my goodness, it's hard work and getting it all together. But I hope that it's made a real contribution around the helping the coaching community see the importance of coaching, really get to feel how powerful and important it is, and B, to move away from trying to ape, if you like, or copy, I should say, rather than ape, the way that psychology, psychotherapy, counseling has grown up through the tradition, presumably, well, largely set by Freud and others, to kind of keep it within a medical framework, within a scientific framework, a research-based framework. So I'm a huge fan of research, advocate for it, love it, but I'm not a researcher. And I think that there has to be place in coaching. So in my book, I talk about things like the darkness and the light, that if we as coaches are afraid of going a bit deeper, we're going to miss so much in our troubled world. And we can do really good work in unusual places, in the workplace. So I'm really pleased at just shifting the dial a little bit and saying, that coaching needs to go deeper and it needs to go broader. Much of what I've been saying today. And then probably what people don't know about is that I am in the process of the early foothills, really the early foothills. I've been for a long time now gathering, my thoughts and information around what I hope will become the next book, which is around the ethics of care and broadening out. I'd love for ethics to become an everyday word, a bit like my mission to bring spirituality back into the everyday. Forget the sort of sacred voices and the wonderful candles and the incense or whatever it is that goes with your particular form of practice. Wonderful stuff. But let's bring it into the everyday. Let's live it.
Yeah,
And I think,
exactly.
again, like ethics, without getting heavy or overly serious about it, let's bring some of these things back into, we're not just consumers. We are citizens, we're human beings with untold gifts and contributions to make. Um, so I'm writing a little piece. I'm writing stuff around that, um, and I'm just in the middle of finishing off a piece called Archipelagos of Sanity. Watch this space about these kinds of conversations. Just where I began today about saying we need more of these kinds of conversations. It's one
Yeah.
of my theories why podcasts have taken off.
Uh, it's just going back to this ethics in the word and how it's a side. Some would argue it's always been front and center, and I'd argue actually no, it's not always been front and center. But I think often people think it is this pocket. Ethics is the pocket, and we enter into it or we enter out of it.
Mm, mm,
It's there or it's not, and we don't have to worry about it if we don't enter into it. But when we enter into it, then we're going deep, dark, nasty. Oh, it's serious, like, and yet it's just there regardless of whether we enter into what we think is the pocket of ethics sitting over there or not. It's already here. We don't have to make it
absolutely.
up. We're just stepping into it by the way we get up and interact with the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. This is what people want to do. They sort of siphon off, silo out and say, oh no, that's not for me. That's for philosophers or, social theorists or, the DEI department or the HR department they deal with. But actually, it's how we live. That's what we're looking at, how we want to live on this planet.
I think it doesn't help that you often have titles going, I'm the ethics officer, ethics and compliance coordinator, or ethics and compliance officer, and I'm going, no wonder everyone's got it all wrong in their head.
Totally. Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Separate them. They're two separate roles. They're two separate
Yeah.
ways of looking at things and working with each other. And I'm sure the people who hold those roles find it difficult if they ever really think about it, about how
Mm,
different those spaces are. And they can
mm.
probably converging a lot more in their work than what they realize. And without that awareness, I think it's dangerous.
We need a sort of catchy title like, everyday ethics or something to,
Yeah.
to, to get people. Because I think the very word ethics, people think, oh, ancient Greece, Aristotle and Plato, Sophocles, it's all terribly complicated. It's all pie in the sky. We've all got to be heroes and all this sort of stuff. I guess that's where people go when they hear the word ethics, rather than let's examine why we do things and how we do them.
Yeah.
And,
They also, I think they also tap into, oh, I've done something wrong. Geez, this issue's come up. Now I have to have an ethics sitting there working with that. So actually, no, it could have even been before that, but you might tap into it a bit more strongly because you're
yeah.
fully focused on thinking, but they get concerned about having done wrong. So
Yeah.
the lived example is an interesting one because I agree with you. I've been writing on it about ethics and living with through an ethical lens, basically. And
I have your book. Excellent. Yeah, the one that
and
you edited. Yeah.
oh well, there's a journal of coaching ethics that's got some
Yeah.
in as well. So
Yeah.
ethics in your decision making. Give us an example of how that's played out. And of course, keep anonymous. We don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Ah, well, I think it's very hard to suddenly on the spot like that think of a good example. I think I've made choices not to work in certain sectors.
Mhm.
Long ago, I absolutely, these are easy decisions to make, probably, but then there are choices nonetheless that I will not work in anything to do with arms or tobacco. And um, I think running the parenting forum we had to make choices about funders, and then we refused funding, for example, from certain bodies that we felt were unethical, that were pursuing profit over the well-being of the people in their target markets.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I say, I'm keeping it anonymous, as you advised, very wise. And that's, it's always difficult, isn't it, to refuse money that for a body, that you're running. But in a sense, I think those were easy. Where it gets difficult are when you have to make choices between two areas. So I'm thinking of a recent example that's actually still on my mind. Someone who left very abruptly, upset from a group that I'm involved with, from a paid position, and I mean, these are people we meet in coaching, and is still to this day not very articulate, not able to explain. And it was a bit sort of, I felt it was like a straw that broke the camel's back. And I'm still mulling over in my mind what would be the best thing to do for her and for the organization she left. Because by leaving so abruptly, there was a sense of accusation. She left people feeling guilty and bad. Why? What have we done? Sort of thing. So there's been no dialogue, no willingness to engage in dialogue. So I'm mulling that one over as how can I help? And then I think in my own work, where do we make our contribution? Where do we, what are the sort of decisions? And I think that something, and perhaps I don't know if it's a bit of a Puritan ethic, but I sort of feel that each of us gets given certain gifts. And if we cultivate those gifts, how do we live them out? I was recently having in the work that we do with women, with my colleague Liz Rivers. Purpose, Power, Presence is our organization, our little thing. And we run a monthly group for women just to come and talk about the challenges that they're facing in their lives. It's called Anima, and it runs monthly. It's a closed group of small number of women, so they get to know each other very well. And we were talking about the sort of work ethic of always needing to be useful, and how women seem to have imbibed that in perhaps an extreme way, that they're less able, a lot of women are less able to say, I'm going to do this for the pure joy and pleasure, like writing, for example. Should we make our writing useful? Should we write about things that might make a useful contribution? Could I write something just for the pure pleasure and joy of writing? And so I've been reflecting quite a bit on that, about not necessarily always being useful.
Mm.
So all of these are ethical choices, in the sense that they're every day. They're the things that we engage with every day in our lived lives, aren't they?
We could check in on, so what is useful? What am I meaning by that word?
Exactly.
And how is that
Mm.
forming my decisions, supporting or not my decisions, just the way I understand useful in this context?
Mm. It's why I don't use the word. I use the word contribution, and that is about seeing ourselves as agents on this earth, not just as consumers or passengers on the bus, in that sense, that we actually have agency.
How would writing be writing for the sake of writing still has a contribution?
Absolutely. But it's not necessarily useful. I have a number of poet friends. My cousin is a poet living in the States, and it's not useful in the utilitarian sense. It's not going to put bread on someone's table, but or stop a war, but it might raise spirits. When you read a poem that touches you, and you go, oh, yes, absolutely, it makes a contribution in that sense. And poetry always makes a contribution. So I think poetry is quite a good example for that.
Yeah. And sometimes that contribution is just for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't have to be outside of you.
It
And
doesn't always, yeah.
so in that frame, it still could be useful.
It could be, yeah. Useful is an interesting word, as you say, worthy of further examination. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do believe that we don't live for ourselves alone. And I think that in our highly individualistic societies, people are quite isolated.
Yep.
And this gives rise to all sorts of ailments and, mental health problems. We can get quite depressed and anxious. I mean, there's a lot to be anxious about in this world, a lot to be depressed about and despairing. But I think when we're isolated, it exacerbates that. When we have these kinds of conversations, whether it's one-to-one or whether there's a group, there's something very rich, and we're weaving together. My colleague Dr. Simon Weston, talks a lot about composting and weaving. I'm on the faculty of the Eco Leadership Institute. Very proud and delighted to be. It's a wonderful program, and I love teaching on it. Aside from many other teaching gigs in Morocco and Ireland and the Eco Leadership Institute, and we talk a lot about the power of just open-ended but purposeful conversations. We're not just here to chat about my cat or the latest coffee beans. There's a sort of rationale to it. And we might meander into all sorts of, and discover all sorts of wonderful creeks and byways and alleyways and treasures down there. And we don't have enough of those non-utilitarian, but highly contributive conversations. It's what I'm writing about at the moment. And yeah, we weave that into that. That program has a lot of space for that.
Yeah. Nice. Space is great for the creation of thought and who knows what else arises from it, but also for navigating what challenges, whether they be ethical or not. Whoever wants to, I use the word challenge intentionally and not ethical. It's an intentional choice of word. And those challenges arise in different forms. And I'm interested to know about a challenge that you have faced and even tell us a bit about that story and how you navigated it and the outcome.
Gosh, which challenge to choose? Yeah, I mean, there's a. I hope my daughter won't mind me sharing quite a recent challenge. My youngest daughter, out of the blue, uh, became was diagnosed with cancer in November. She's absolutely fine now. She's very well. She had wonderful treatment in the UK, and it was caught early, and she will be fine. But it's been my challenge with all of that was, how to deal with my own shock as a mother, but and be there for her.
Yeah.
And I have to say, coming back to not being alone, my elder daughter they were both very good at guiding me in what they needed from me.
Wonderful.
My youngest was very good at saying, right now, Mum, I just need you to be there, but just quiet, not say anything. Because my own tendency, surprise, surprise, won't surprise you to know, is that when I'm anxious, even more so than when I'm not anxious, I talk things out.
Yeah,
I
me too.
like conversation. So luckily, my husband likes to talk and listen as well. So we do a lot of that. We kind of think as we talk and work things through. So I'm a perfect client for coaching or therapy or anything, because I like to think aloud. And that was not going to work
No.
in this particular challenge. I needed to really back off and take a back seat and be a rock. And I remember one day my eldest daughter saying to me, Mum, you can talk to me, you can talk to Dad, you can talk to your friend, but you can't talk to Maddie. our youngest, you just have to be a rock, just be
Mm.
there. And she was quite, fierce is too strong, but she was absolutely firm with me.
Yeah.
And it was so good that they
Mm.
were both able, that we were able, the three of us together, and we made sure that Maddie never went to a single appointment alone.
Mm-hmm.
But we always checked, who would be the best person right now. And it
Mm.
wasn't right for me always to be there because just as a mother, I triggered her because she was, of course, concerned for
Yeah.
my feelings as
Yeah.
well as a mother of someone anxious and,
Mm-hmm.
loving. So it's a very acute example, I think, of the kind of way I would suggest it was quite a healthy and good way to deal with perhaps less acute challenges that we have in the workplace, in coaching, is to say, choose the people you want to talk to, that you want to think with. What shall we think about today? How shall we think this through? And creating those spaces for those rich conversations. And, and there's space to, you need, it's always interesting what people talk about. And we say this as coaches, don't we? And what I notice is we can't be deep and serious all the time. And conversations need to have those little breathing spaces where you say, "Oh, you know what? I read this book the other day," or "Have you seen the latest episode of da 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 on TV?" And whatever your
Yep.
favorite, or talk about clothes or whatever lightens, whatever it is
Yep.
that just creates a bit of, and that also is it's a sort of breath up, it's a lightening, because if we make hard barriers between what's trivial, what we might designate as trivial or superficial, and one day after we'd been at the hospital, the three of us together, we all went off and had brunch. We had breakfast. We said, let's go off and get a real oomph of a breakfast at a what we call in England a greasy spoon. That's a sort of traditional cafe that does fried eggs and
Yep.
sausages and all that kind of English breakfast stuff. And we found this wonderful little cafe not far from the hospital that we were at. And they'd stuck all over the walls little kind of signs, um, uh, what do you call it, under plastic, so that they were preserved, little jokes all over. And we
Ah.
had the most uproarious breakfast, and we just had a meeting with a consultant and so on, and done blood tests and all this kind of stuff. And we were able to just, and you went to the loo and you were sitting there laughing away because there were all sorts of funny jokes and clever witticisms. And it just made me think about that's a recent challenge that I guess, as time will tell, but I'm sure it's brought us closer together. We were already very close. Um, and even my husband, he went to a couple of appointments with Maddie, and he has a very different, he will talk about history and London. He knows London very well. And that was great for her because she didn't have to she didn't want to think all the time about her health.
Yeah.
And so she was able to ease into, and he's very funny. He likes to tell jokes and things. And so he, said, let's go for a walk afterwards. Told her about London Wall, and they were at Bart's Hospital, and it's a centre of London that has wonderful history. So life works in surprising ways. And I guess what messages or learning would I extract from that is make your family, and the same goes at work. Make your team, pull together the people who you want to think together with,
Mm.
laugh together with, and invest in that, so that when you hit the buffers with a big challenge, you know exactly what your team is and how we're all going to pull together.
Yeah, it's a lovely story you've got with your daughter, and I think it's a testament to the relationship you already had, the fact that you
Yeah.
could still be together and laugh about something after a serious appointment. But it has me also think about my own daughter and my own parenting, because I could resonate through some things that my mum has always said to me, that when I get anxious, I talk a lot. And that's true. If there's something going on with my daughter, like when she's had to go in to have her tonsils out, I was holding her and waiting for her to go in, I'd be talking. And then she'd be gone and she'd be doing what they got to do in the operating theatre, and I'd be talking, talking, talking about who knows what. Who knows what I was talking about? I don't know. But it was like Mum would just hold that talk, whatever it was that I was talking about, would let it happen. Makes me think about her being pregnant and going through childbirth and how much I want to be there for her if she wants me during birth. And I mean, she didn't choose to have me there, and that's perfectly fine. But I actually am quite relieved in some ways, because I don't know that I would be the best person for her in that time, as much as I can nurture her and mother her in hard times. But I think she needs exactly who she has, and that's her partner.
Mm.
But
And being able to recognize that in ourselves, we're not, you know, we're not always the right people. And it's the same at work. I'm
yeah,
always thinking, in the various teams that I work with, I will often say, why don't you have a conversation with so and so about that?
hmm
Because I know that I'm not necessarily the right person.
yeah. But I
And
have a good role this time. She's pregnant again.
hey,
There's
congratulations.
There's already a granddaughter, so I will be looking after the granddaughter, which is
Wow.
something I do very, very well while they can go and do what they need to do.
Yes, yes. Oh, congratulations. That's
Thank
lovely.
you. Yeah.
Mm.
So moving along, because we're almost done. It,
Hmm.
um, what would you like your legacy to be?
Mm. I would like twofold, I suppose. I'd like to be remembered with fondness and with love, even by, those who've loved me and who love me and who I have loved and continue to love. Um, I think that's a fair legacy. I'd like to, I'm thinking a lot about having a lighter footprint on this planet. We all gather so much stuff. I'm looking right now at a whole bookshelf of wonderful books and thinking this needs slimming down. That's something that I'm thinking about. And then some of my writing and some of the contribution I've made to the coaching profession. It's enough. It's enough. I've helped a few people, I hope, some individuals, and I hope that I've made a little bit of a contribution, both, excuse me, through my writing and through my thinking,
Hmm.
through my encouragement of others, through my teaching. So yeah, that's fine.
And the last question for you I have is about, this is a big question, and the lay of the land of the world at the moment. I think it's too easy to go off in one particular direction and maybe try and encapsulate everything, but let's try not in this time. Let's try and find a focus point. And what do you think the challenge of the times is for the coaching profession? And what are we doing about it?
Yeah,
Would we do?
I think it brings us back to ethics, actually, interestingly. I think the coaching profession is at another inflection point.
Mm,
I think when I wrote my book was published in 2017. I think around 2015, 16, 17, it was at an inflection point around deepening and broadening the profession rather than getting stuck on, you know, rules and tick boxes and, there's only one right way. I think the accrediting associations need to catch up a little bit. And I think the inflection point we're at now is around making choices about where we put our support, really. And these are ethical decisions. And it's not for us to dictate, but for us to encourage a climate where people can make choices for themselves, and we always post rationalize the choices. And choices are always made with a number of different elements in mind. Some people need to earn, a sizable income, let's say, to support a lifestyle or family, and so on. And they might make choices that say, okay, this time, I'll work for X organization, even though I'm not entirely happy with the way they are in the world. But I'll do that. So I think that that's the inflection point I'm seeing at the moment, is to be a little bit more upfront, that we're not all people to all men, as it were, all people for all people. That there are ethical issues here. So I think that's a challenge. I think that's a challenge because I slapped my wrists, but I'm going to say it again because it's a shorthand. I once said on a panel that the coaching profession shouldn't aim to be the Switzerland of sort of the helping professions, in the sense of, just bring us your money and we'll put it into the vault sort of thing. And I love Switzerland, and this is not against Switzerland. The idea being it captures something about neutrality. I think neutrality is a fantasy that we entertain to salve our consciences. I think all choices we make are ethical choices, but we can pretend they're not. I don't think there's anything really. I think objectivity is a very moot point at best, and probably false, in the sense that we all bring a perspective, we bring a point of view. And the more open and transparent we can be as coaches, then our clients can make informed choices. Is this the thinking partner that I want to work with?
Mm.
And I'm not right for everybody, in the same way we've just been speaking about our families. Yeah. So I think that is a big challenge facing coaching right now. It's grown a little bit too fast for perhaps some of the supportive structures to catch up with. So there's a lot of discussion about that. I personally, and I would say this because I'm involved with the Association for Coaching, I like the way the AC, and I have to quickly say I have very cordial professional relationships, very good professional relationships with the ICF and the EMCC and all the others. But I personally like the emphasis on developing our own robust ethical compass, and then treating coaches and each other as adult and as professional, worthy of trust and respect, rather than there's only one right way to do things and you have to do it this way. So having a more creative and interactive approach to things like accreditation, like the way you run the ethics forum. These are spaces, there's no one right way. It's not about setting down a list of rules, is it? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, my concern actually is just kind of launching from that, is that coaching sees itself, or would like to see itself, or would like to position itself as being the cure-all for all of what society needs. And there is some language around the coaching space like that. And I think there's some real problems about walking into that. And we need to be checking in on that a little better,
Absolutely.
I think.
Absolutely. It's not a cure-all by a very, very long chalk. What it can offer, and I think coaches we as a profession aren't capitalizing enough, is the capacity to hold space for other people to have important conversations that are respectful, that are really, where they really listen to each other. And this is a cultural thing as well, bringing in other cultures, not, so there's a whole discussion here, and I've written about it, about the challenging of the Enlightenment values and empire and so on. We've talked about that before in the ethics forum. What is justice ethics for one culture actually is rape and pillage for another. We have to be quite tough and with ourselves here. Coaching isn't going to solve these sorts of things, but we can hold space for those kinds of conversations. So I'm quite keen and interested to explore further things like citizens' assemblies as ways for decision making.
It just makes me think about the safeguarding the integrity of coaching
Mm,
we have, that it just dawned on me in some ways that this gathering that we have and these roundtable discussions that are happening with all those coaching bodies represented, that is in one way leading the way of what we should be aiming for.
mm,
And it has me just question right here and now, what can we then be doing in those roundtables to actually show that more, that that's what's happening between, across and within all these bodies in these roundtables beyond hopefully
mm,
this article we're going to publish soon. I think there's more we could do a bit more publicly as a
mm,
collective in those
mm.
roundtables.
I agree. I mean, it's interesting that this is exactly the conversation we have at the SCC, the Sustainable Coaching Coalition, always looking for roundtable formats where participants can hear a little bit of input, but really engage in conversation, as you've just described. Because I'm not sure that there are very many forums for these.
No,
Coaching can be quite isolating.
yeah.
Coaches tend to work either one-to-one or within an organization with a team or a group. They're not necessarily having those spaces where they can reflect on these kinds of important issues.
Yeah, so I guess the forum, the Coaching Ethics Forum, will be that place for next year. We'll hold those
Mm,
spaces. But I was really thinking from, you look to leaders to find a direction, find a way of being, etc. And I just thought the round tables with the safeguarding, that's
mm,
leadership in action of how we want to see
yeah.
the profession going forward. And we need to make that particular round table a bit more public from time to time, I think, of
Mm,
interaction. We
I
had
agree.
a forum last year at the coaching
Hmm.
forum. We had one panel group, but I think we can do some more public facing discussions
Hmm. Hmm.
as that round table.
I would agree. I would agree. So
That
that
people
people can
see.
listen in and see the kind of discussion that's happening. And it also, what it does is it normalizes.
Yeah.
We started by saying, how many sort of hazarding a guess at the kind of assumptions people make when you say the word ethics. Oh my goodness, it's guilt-inducing. I must have done something wrong, and all of that, or it's all a bit, sort of highfalutin, Greek philosophy and so. Um, and I think if people could see, it's about real people
Yeah.
trying to find ways of thinking about how do you make choices that are
Mhm.
good choices rather than unconscious choices
Mhm.
that just go along the tram lines or just follow the herd. I think it was Eric Fromm who said, just because lots of people are behaving in a mad, crazy, violent way, that doesn't make it right. That each one of us, we need to uh, have that thinking capacity.
Yeah. Well, this is something else we're going to do now, clearly, because I think there's a lot of strength in that particular idea. So we'll see. You know what?
Brilliant.
Thank you so much for this chat, Hetty.
Been a delight. Thank you, Wendy-Ann.
So, do you got any last words you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, I don't know. You know, uh, Pay attention, stay aware. I've coined this acronym, which I keep using now in my talks, CARE. Courage, C for courage, A for attentiveness. Awareness has been a bit overused, but just paying attention to little things. Laying a table with care and attention is a lovely thing. And courage to do something different, think a bit more deeply, not just follow the crowd, be a little bit more who you really want to be, your best self, as it were, your friends. And then the R in care is for responsibility, responsiveness, saying, okay, what am I willing to be responsive for? I'm not just this free agent floating on this planet. And last but by no means least, E for equality and equity,
Mm.
which is, or you can even have E for ethics if you like, but equality and equity, really important that we don't have all the answers, that the westernized Anglo-Saxon European Enlightenment way of dominating the world is not the only way. It's not even right. for anybody any longer. I think it's super harmful. So I leave you with care. I leave you with care.
Thank you. You just never know what's going to pop up in the last minute when you put on.
Indeed, the last minute. Thank you very much for inviting me to have this conversation with you, Wendy-Ann. It's been a pleasure.